Well, good evening, guys. Thanks for joining us here. I have Gabe, Lyons, and David Kinnaman with me. We thought this would be an interesting extension of our morning because this morning I certainly saw in some of the stories we heard about that maybe I had a lot of thoughts and prejudices going into the discussion about who are the kind of people who end up in jail. And I guess an extension of that to me right now is the idea of what are the attitudes that I carry into every conversation that I have about people who think differently than I do and people whose thinking I don't understand. So anyway, we've got these guys here. They have this book that you've heard about, The Good Faith, and they actually sent me a copy, and I read it, which I think is a nice up from Eric Metaxas, who would just read the back. I actually read it with a highlighter and prepared. So anyway, we're going to just have a little conversation with these guys, an extension of some of the ideas that we hit on this morning. So these two guys have a history together, written a book, Unchristian, 10 years ago? Yep. And Gabe has started a couple of different things. The Catalyst Conference, which is a big leaders' thought process, as well as Q Ideas, which is going now. Gabe, you can probably hit on that a little bit more. But David is with Barna Research, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 21 years. And I heard over 1 million interviews. Is that true?
Yeah, our company has conducted 1 million interviews during that 2 decades of work, and it's pretty amazing amount of work. When you think about basically being a social researcher, and like spreadsheets are my love language, and so crosstabs, it's, being a geek is a fun job.
Very good. Gabe, tell us a little bit about Q, just for guys that are unfamiliar with it, in case there was such a person.
We created Q, which basically stands for questions. We wanted to create a place within the Christian community where leaders could come together and not feel like they had to have all the answers. So many conferences and places that, they sort of assume you're either asking certain questions that you're not even asking, and they give you the answers to them. We wanted to create a space where Christians, and especially leaders, didn't have to have the answers, but could ask some bigger questions, could think forward about where's the culture going. We usually try to anticipate. You never can anticipate all of it, but looking forward over the next 12 months at least and saying, what are the big, challenging conversations, current issues that are about to take place, and how can we be prepared and thoughtful and winsome and be curious about our world and not just sort of grapple onto some of the old ways that we've approached culture in the past when we've found disagreement with it.
Absolutely. Which the Q this year is in Denver, home of the Super Bowl champions. I don't know if anyone mentioned that. Also home of the president of the New Canaan Society. Anyway, let's talk about the book. So anyway, Good Faith. I think this is a great subtitle, Being Christian When Society Thinks You're Irrelevant and Extreme. So a couple of obviously important words there, but so let's start by just what is the good faith? What does that even mean?
So, basically what's happened since we worked on this book on Christian, so being a researcher, we try to understand sort of what's happening in terms of the cultural trends. And so Gabe and I worked on the book on Christian 9 years ago. It was actually a private study that we had done just to help with the beginning of Gabe's organization, Q. And so it was out of our friendship that this research study began. And we found all these negative perceptions among young non-Christians that the church was anti-homosexual, judgmental, hypocritical, etc. And so we decided to write that book essentially to try to start a conversation. What was none of us expected that it would do what it did in terms of creating a conversation. In fact, it was shrink wrapped by the publisher. I went to Barnes and Noble the night it was out, and I thought, crap, no one is going to ever read this because it's shrink wrapped. And anyway, it did well, but. What's happened in the meantime is that these new negative perceptions, we really try to highlight this idea of irrelevant and extreme. And then as we try to, as we're working with a lot of different leaders and organizations, the idea of good faith was how do we respond to these negative perceptions today? You look at the election, you look at the way, sort of normal Christian conviction is viewed. There is this increasing skepticism that's taking place now about what faith represents in the world. And so irrelevance and extremism are part of this new reality that we have to sort of live with as Christians. And so good faith, we believe, is the way forward on that, is sort of how do we think well, how do we actually sort of represent Jesus in these very difficult conversations. So that's just a quick summary from where we've come from unchristian to this new project.
And I would add just a couple of the data points that kind of jumped off the page to us was that 46% of Americans believe religion is part of the problem in our culture. And I think a lot of us in the room would probably agree with that and go, hey, religion actually, this man-made sort of rule structure we try to throw on top of people and smother them with can be pretty bad. But you move down a couple notches, 42% of Americans believe people of faith are part of the problem. So it's not just religion, it's actually people who claim faith as a vital part of their life. They now think we're part of the problem in our country. And so I think you guys understand this in your communities, with your colleagues, all the work that you're trying to put forward. I think one of the tensions we're all feeling is what does it mean to be a person that has conviction and faith and yet walk forward in a culture where we want to have credibility, we want to engage, we do love our friends and our neighbors, but I think we're all struggling with like, how do we do this now? Because things have changed, the game has changed.
And the whole language has changed. It seems like it's flipped around really fast. I was watching the Oscars last weekend, and twice I heard them talk about the term, what was it, gender?
Gender confirmation.
Confirmation was a word I heard twice. So it's not a sex change anymore. It's not even
sex reassignment.
Gender it's actually a confirmation now. And I thought, man, I'm 2 words behind already. And but I guess, like, when I heard that, like, I had a reaction, right? I had a full-blown gut reaction. Like, that's absolutely wrong. And so without going soft on our principle, what is the reaction? Not the reaction, but I guess, how should we be interacting with that kind of stuff? Because it's happening super fast, and it's coming at us. And so what is the way we should be responding to the changes in the attitudes, words, and definitions of this stuff that fall against what we believe?
So I think one of the ways to think about this, and this is so being a researcher, a million interviews, we get to work with different, entertainment companies in LA, where our company is located in the Los Angeles area. We work with all sorts of Christian nonprofits and churches and entertainment companies and for-profit companies trying to use research to try to help understand the world. And so when Gabe asked us to do this project, when we were sort of talking about doing this book, the thing for me was I started to look at this research. At first I was like, well, I don't know if I want to, do another book about this. And so we talked a little bit about this sort of private study we wanted to take public. And I started to look at the data about all these different issues, gender dysphoria, the LGBT community, race, how evangelism. We just showed you on the video the fact that 60% of adults believe that it's extremist for you to share your faith. 52% believe that if you hold to the traditional view of same-sex marriage, same-sex relationships being immoral, that's extremist. 42% believe if you were to leave a good-paying job to go pursue missions work, that would be extremist. So part of what you're feeling is that even to call it a sex reassignment, surgery, or a gender reassignment surgery, sex change, like the whole world is shifting. It's actually changing its mind about the Christian way of conviction, about all of these different issues. And so for me, I actually decided to work on this book again, in part because I was so convinced that the church has to deal with these really critical issues. And so that's part of what has driven us to work on this, is it's like the world just feels like the language that we use as Christians doesn't even connect. And so there's this huge set of changes that are taking place under the surface that we need to pay attention to.
Yeah, there's new rules. And if you don't know the new rules of the game, then you pretty much are ostracized pretty quickly. Like one of the new rules, 89% of Americans believe no one should ever criticize someone's life choices or behavior. And I think as Christians we go, yeah, we don't want to be critical of people, but you think about the Christian way of life. It's like you read the scriptures in the morning and you kind of feel like you're criticized sometimes for your life choices or behavior because you're being taught a better way to live or what is true. And so we all are living in a culture where the morality basically says the self is all that matters. My pursuit of desire, pleasure, that's what life's about. There's a whole new morality, and we no longer agree on the basics. What's right, what's wrong, what's moral, what's immoral. So enter the Christians into that space where we've seen a bit of history, where we've had a lot of power and control in our culture, and the culture's now responding and going, you had your day, that day's over, now we're at the table, and we want to see some things change. And so I think it's about how do we live through sort of the balance of power shift, remain faithful and joyful and hopeful, about what it means to be the church, because most people living in any kind of culture don't have the advantages we've had in America to call ourselves Christians and have those kind of privileges. And so I think there's a lot of positive that will come from this, but it's not going to be without going through some serious pain points. Some in America in the research would describe the moment as being persecuted. David and I are very careful not to use that term. We think that's a bit of an overstatement of what's happening in America. We think what we're feeling is a lot of pressure. And how many of you live in New York City? A few of you, yeah? So my wife and I were in New York City the last 4 years, and we just recently moved. But when we got there, I know in the first 6 months of life, as those of you who made that transition to New York, the thing that we realized was the pressure cooker of New York City started to squeeze us, and what was inside started to come out. And so we were having fights about things we'd never had fights about. She was starting to reveal to me like all the things that she was bothered by and how I was as a husband. And I was starting to hear all this. And I'm like, where is this coming from? And we realized the pressure of being in the city, being on top of each other all the time, there's no sort of relief from it, was starting to make some things come out that we were easily able to hide in sort of the comfort of the suburbs and being distracted. Well, I think for the church, very similar moment. We're being squeezed now, and a lot of things are coming out. We're starting to see, what are we made of? What's really underneath sort of surface Christianity? And I think that could be a really great thing for the church.
So, Gabe, you do a lot of stuff with Q ideas. You're addressing really frontline issues, and the goal of Q is to say, what are the questions we need to ask to hear perspectives in the world so we know how to respond to them in a Christian worldview? Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah.
Okay. So, in light of that, you have all kinds of things that you're dealing with, and you probably have to start conversations about topics, looking ahead saying, all right, this is the topic that's coming. And so in light of that, who do we need to invite to do this? And how do you even invite some of these people who are in a very different space in this fringe of what we're talking about? And you're saying, hey, I want you to come and explain your lifestyle or your choice or your beliefs or certain things to us who don't understand it. How are you starting those conversations? And what can we learn from that? Because we're going to need to have those conversations as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, some of the difficult conwe're all having. I mean, they're with our family members, they're with our children, they're with our parents in some cases, good friends we've known since college. I mean, we're all kind of having to navigate that. But with Q in particular, it does push me into a direction where I'm talking to leaders who aren't Christian, who have very different worldviews. And part of what we try to create is a space where Christians can hear somebody thoughtfully explain how they feel, what it is that they're thinking. So the best example I would have is a few months ago in Boston at our last Q conference, we had Andrew Sullivan. Some of you might recognize Andrew Sullivan's writings. He's one of the leaders of the gay rights movement, lives right here down at DuPont Circle here in D.C., and he's become a friend over the last few years. And while we have conflicting theology about sexuality, and we're open about that and have had many conversations about that, we have complete alignment about the ability in American life for people to have disagreement and to live by their conscience and to not be forced or coerced to make decisions or participate in things that they don't feel like they feel like would actually hurt their conscience or be offensive to what their beliefs are. So at a space like Q, we're able to talk about here's where we have common ground. But also in front of that crowd, we talk about here's where we disagree. But we also have moments, in that particular conversation of apologizing, where I'm apologizing to him for how poorly the Christian community has treated the LGBTQ community. And at the same time, he's apologizing on behalf of his community to say, we're overreaching right now. There's a lot of people who've been hurt and who just want to get you back. And because of that, there's going to be a lot of this. And the fact is, that's not what I think. I don't think that's the way it ought to be. I don't think that's what America is. And so we're going to work together to try to lean into a better way. So we're talking, this in the next month at our next Q conference. We're talking about gender dysphoria. We'll have somebody on stage, who experiences gender dysphoria, a woman who feels like a man. We talk about euthanasia. We talk about so many of the topics that all of us, if we're not thinking about them right now, they will be, I think, real conversations in our families, in our workplaces, as you think about HR policies, all kinds of things. And so we're just trying to stay a little bit ahead of the curve, not just be so reactionary, but say, what is God's design in all of these things? How do we change our posture, knowing that we're in a world now where we don't have this dominant position, and that could be a good thing? How can we listen more? And after listening more, know how to approach these things with humility and love, and lead with love, not kind of respond with fear.
Yeah, I look, when I hear you say that, I think about, by all means. I think about two things right away. One is the relationships, the friendships we have. And when in this community, what we talk about is seeing each other for more than just the sum total of our choices and our actions, but really seeing each other for the best of who we can be in friendship, right? So that's grace in action among brothers in New Canaan society. But I also know how many of these guys run businesses, how many of these guys have hundreds of people that work for them, that those employees know flat out good and well where these guys are, and they want to lead well. And in leading well, they want to uphold their values really well. They want to hold to a biblical faith. They also know those people's names. They care for them. I know these guys. They love and care for their employees and the people they work with and for. And so how do we take this stuff into those two areas and begin to love well in our community and love well in our business community especially?
You know, I think that's part of what, being a business owner, I've been at this company now for 20 years, and I bought the business from the founder, George Barn, about 6.5 years ago, and we've tried to hire young and think about really, creating the kind of business that we want to run and that we want to work for. And a lot of these really complex questions come up, even in a Christian company, but even especially as we're working with different entertainment companies or mainstream businesses. We're constantly trying to explain the Christian community, for example, to mainstream media, which is like knocking your head against the wall some days. So one of the things for me is that this generation of millennials, you might have some millennial employees, you might have some kids who are in the millennial generation, and this is a very different mindset. Part of what we learned in this project is that they actually have a completely different, as Gabe is saying, they're sort of buying into this moral code. They have a different idea about how to work. I had one of the millennials who came up to me, she's been working with me for about 6 months, and she said, I feel like I'm plateaued in my career, You haven't even started yet, really, And so, you have to deal with this different kind of mindset about fairness or what, all the questions that come up. And so I think for us to recognize that as we're going to lead well, we're going to have to really understand their point of view, millennials in particular. But listen, they're just the tip of the iceberg in terms of reflecting where culture is at. So 89% say you shouldn't criticize someone else's life choices. And so how do you create a business? How do you create an environment that helps them to continue to grow? One of the things we've learned just in managing millennials, for example, is that we want to try to assign them to different tasks and change their job with some regularity so they have new challenges, so they don't feel like they're plateauing so frequently. And the trick works, actually. I don't mean that, it actually helps. People get bored at their role, and they need some new challenges. But how we've done this then, what we've tried to do in this project is to say, listen, if we're gonna understand, for example, this issue of same-sex attraction, there's a whole range of questions that are gonna come up for us as we're trying to lead in this. So we talk about 5 different ways to think about issues of sex and sexuality, and it actually applies to so many different things. First is our theology. We start as Christians, as convictional Christians, with what we believe about these things. And then there's issues of relationships, how we manage our friendships, how we manage our company, how we think about our kids. There's issues of ministry, so if we're in a church, as we think about what's the policies that a local church needs to have in place. There are issues of politics, so how do we apply our theology into the political sphere? And then there's issues of sort of the public square and how we run our businesses. And so on the first issue, Gabe and I come to the conclusion after studying these issues for many, many years that there isn't a lot of room for, movement. We hold to the historic belief that, that sex in any kind of way is only to be done in marriage, right, between a man and a woman. And this applies to all singles and to all married people. And whatever our attractions are. And yet, so that gives us a lot of freedom in these other 4 dimensions in terms of how that might be applied. And so God calls us to use our minds as we're thinking about how we run our businesses, how we think about the dynamics of the relationships that we have with people that are on our staffs or even our own children. Listen, I'm sure in this room we have people who are, their kids, their grandkids, they're in their communities. They have lots of different beliefs about these things. And so how is it that we live well and hold to our beliefs and yet really understand how it is that we can be in community and relationship with people that we work with and live with?
And you guys were calling that the firm center soft edges? Is that
That's right. Yeah.
the chapter? And it's that principle, right? That we're not there's some things we just aren't given any ground on. And
Well, I mean, Tim Keller says this, and I'm sure many of you respect and have listened to him a lot. But look, what we believe as Christians is that God's designed us as human beings to function in a certain way. And when we function in a certain way, it leads to flourishing. When we get outside of what God's design is for that, it actually leads to more harm, and it doesn't lead to people truly flourishing or to societies flourishing. So we believe it's important to understand what we believe about these things and that we go to the source for that, which is Scripture. It's not just what the culture's telling us we should think. But once you're firm on that and you understand that, it gives you so much freedom in all these other areas to just love so well and to disagree with other Christians. You know, I mean, the little examples, right? Should you go to a gay wedding? Sure. I mean, there's plenty of people who absolutely, they're your friends. You're going to show up in that moment. But there's other people I know in this room who say, no, I wouldn't do that because that's against my conscience. We need to allow for that freedom. And I think that's one of the challenges in the church is we get so divisive with one another that we don't know how to just support one another as we contextually try to love people really well. One church, I talked to a pastor today, they said, absolutely, if a lesbian couple comes to our couple wants to dedicate their child, we enthusiastically said yes, because at our church, we want to bless children. We don't put a bunch of parents through a bunch of qualifiers before we'll bless their children. Well, I know another pastor who says, actually for us, baby dedication is something that the whole church is involved in, and we are actually talking about the whole of the family and our support for it. So you can see already, I mean, just in 2 examples, this is complex. We all know this, but we need to have some freedom into how we're all going to express love to our children, to our friends, and we haven't done a good job at that. So that's why it's hard even to bring this up and talk about the theology part without talking about all of the expressions of love that we should actually be leading with. And I would argue you can do that better when you really know what leads to flourishing. And if you're confused about that, then it's actually hard to know whether you're helping somebody or harming them.
yeah.
And I can tell a story that I think might illustrate this. So, 9 years ago, we wrote this book on Christian, and the primary perception was that the Christian community was anti-homosexual. So 91% of young non-Christians says you guys are against gay and lesbian people. And we, took a hard look at that and said in a lot of cases the church has been guilty of really, really terrible, un-Christian behavior towards the gay and lesbian community. And so, we literally wrote the book on this. And yet, in the meantime, I mean, you want to ask about what's happened in the 9 years since the book. In the meantime, I can tell you that, my brother-in-law passed away from AIDS. And I'm going to tell you just a little bit of a kind of a personal story here about how I think all of us have to wrestle with, so my theological point of view has not changed in the last 9 years. I've read a ton of books. Gabe and I have talked to a lot of different people. We have good friends who are gay and lesbian. Nothing has changed in my theology, but here's what's interesting to me about the journey that I've been on. So my brother-in-law, Brian, passed away, and I realized in the writing of this book, of course, a book is a couple years process, but I realized that what people who experience same-sex attraction are looking for is intimacy, is friendship, is a part of us to help them in their journey, right? To become the kind of people that God wants them to be. And I realized that in this whole story, I had really never offered my brother-in-law, Brian, the kind of friendship and intimacy that he would need with his family, with his sister, with my kids. And listen, I think we can have a good discussion about the difference between our relationships and our friendships with Christians versus non-Christians. Brian had never made a commitment to Christ. But be that as it may, what I've learned is that, as he passed away, I never visited him. My dad, who was a pastor, never came to visit, his bedside. And I just realized through this whole process in the last, year as we worked on this project, like how easy it is to have all the right answers in the theology, but not have to put ourselves out there, not to have the sort of relational surface area for people that really need us. And so, if we're going to face this kind of issue, and there are all sorts of issues for the church to face, race, gender, sexuality, pornography, all sorts of crazy things, and a community like NCS is one where we can kind of get past our barriers and our masks and share with one another how is it that we're really doing, how is it that we can be for somebody else, to share our lives with somebody. And again, we can have all the right answers, but not actually do what God's asking us to do with our lives.
Yeah.
And that probably has less even to do with the labels, right? I mean, we were talking today about labels and about the words we put on people to help us understand how to categorize them or even how to categorize ourselves. And I've stepped foot into several churches where I felt like my label was the only thing that was seen. And in some ways, the church has not treated sinners well, right? It doesn't actually have to do with any of the labels. A lot of the reason that NCS exists is because we need a much better definition of grace. We need a much better definition of what it means to love someone for who they are, and again, not just for their choices or the sum total of their beliefs, but for who they are in their best version. So the good faith talks a lot about seeing the best version of someone and being able to see them in spite of these other things that are labels or tags or buckets that we kind of put people in.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, the image of God that we talked about earlier, I mean, God's design for every single one of us is the image of God is trying to break through. If we, as Christians in the church, aren't the first to find that in other people and to celebrate that, that's why earlier, one of the biggest perceptions is we're judgmental, we're self-righteous. We're the first to point out the negative in someone, and that's sort of in our mind. We stereotype that person, maybe for the rest of our relationship, around some one negative thing about maybe that we disagree with. We should be doing the opposite. We should be heaping on praise and affirmation for people and finding the good in them and celebrating that. And when we do that, and I would say in the race conversation, that's one of the things I've been learning the last couple of years of how much I've had my own implicit racial bias. It hasn't been explicit. It wasn't that I was racist, but I did grow up in Virginia. I grew up in an environment where there was a lot of racism going on, and I wouldn't have known that until I got older. Fortunately, by the grace of God, one of my best friends in middle school was an African-American boy, the only boy that came to our church that was African-American. And as my life went forward, the thing I realized around the last couple years with Ferguson and Baltimore and a lot of white people were going, what is happening right now? And so the only way I knew to go through that was to talk to one of my friends, a guy named David Bailey, who's an African-American in Richmond, and just to have these deep conversations. And I said, David, what am I missing? And he said, it's not that it's explicit, it's implicit. It's all the ways in which you just perceive and think and assume about my life, my story, my history, because I'm black, that I'm a certain kind of black, or that I like these kinds of things or not these kinds. It's all of those kinds of things you're putting into the relationship. And in fact, we talked about it. He went back and looked at my last book I did 5 years ago and did an audit on the book for me related to race.
That was fun.
Yeah, and he basically went through it and said, hey, the only time you mention African Americans is when you're talking about poor communities or when you're talking about people who are serving in some of those communities. There's not any examples of African American leaders who are doing some of the really cool things that you're talking about. And what it shows and reveals is the poverty of your own friendships.
The poverty of your own friendships.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I'm poorer because my life is surrounded by a bunch of white people. And that the more diverse my friendships can become, the more I will start to see the beauty of what God's good world has for all of us. And so I think, yeah.
So in the book, you use a term, confident pluralism, which I'd not heard before. But then it talked about a potluck instead of a melting pot. Those words I understood. So can you guys talk about confident pluralism and why a potluck is better than a melting pot?
Well, confident pluralism, I give credit to John Anazu. He's an author and a writer. He has a book coming out probably in the next month called Confident Pluralism. He's the first I heard that term from and asked him, could we use that to try to describe this? Because I think it speaks to the moment we're in, is that, pluralism means there's a lot of seats at the table. There's a lot of faiths represented, no faith at all. That is what American public life was really always designed to be. We're just one of the first generations to experience the full thrust of that. And so now that we're sitting in the middle of it, there are these questions. How will our public square go forward? How will your businesses go forward? What are your responsibilities as a corporation in the midst of that kind of an environment? And we use the illustration of a melting pot, which some would argue in our culture that America should just be a melting pot. Like we all melt together, we all become the same. We all think the same. It's a group think kind of culture. And until we get to that point, we haven't reached the ultimate of what a great society would be. We use the illustration of more of a potluck dinner, that America was designed to be a place where we each bring our own points of view to it, our own faith, our own opinions, our own experiences, and we share in those together as a community, and we accommodate one another. We don't just assimilate. We don't just become like one another. And as Christians, this is a really important thing to understand because we're going to keep feeling the cultural pressure as the cultural consensus changes about some of the things that Scripture and we as the church believe. The air is going to be pushing us further and further to just assimilate. And what's important is to know, how can we not assimilate but accommodate? To say, hey, I love you, and even though you're my Muslim neighbor and I disagree theologically, we're going to find ways to be friends and to work together and to get along within our community or within our workplace. And that's sort of the vision, I think, at the meal level that we were trying to describe.
And a lot of this is, our whole country is breaking up into a lot of different tribes and fragments. And so we have, like the evangelicals are a super segment, but they're still a very small percentage of the total population, and you've got Muslims and the rise of the nuns, the NONES, the skeptics, so people who are religiously unaffiliated. That's actually the fastest growing faith group in America is the nuns, people who are religiously unaffiliated. It helps explain Bernie Sanders, that he'd be a viable candidate in our world today. And so it's interesting for me, being a polling guy, to see all these different super segments who are all trying to scratch and claw to have their point of view sort of supersede others. And this is this idea of confident pluralism that, everyone has their own kind of extremism. A healthy culture doesn't strip extremism out. Of course, violent extremism we want no part of. But a healthy culture actually says all of these different pieces actually make us a very vibrant community. Now, as Christians, we still want to see all of those people follow Jesus, but for us to have our own healthy tribe, we also have to advocate for the health of these other tribes. And we see this within, I think, the pages of Daniel, for example, where Daniel, we often think about him as sort of a modern-day culture warrior, but the truth is for 3 years, he learns the language and literature of Babylon. He becomes the Secretary of State of one of the most pagan civilizations in human history. In Daniel 2, we learn that he keeps all the pagan philosophers alive. That's an example of confident pluralism. He's not trying to eliminate the competition so he can just get into the throne room and do his dream interpretation tricks. And so there's this sense in which Daniel is a great model for a confident pluralism in a world that's very chaotic. And I'd like to think that the Christian community at its very best won't just respond to sort of all of these changes with fear and persecution and woe is me. That in fact the gospel actually does matter and can matter in this very complex, hyper-challenged, I call it digital Babylon. That's the new world that we're living in. How can we live faithfully in this new context? And I believe the church can rise to that challenge.
Let me just add one thing as I think about the group of men sitting here today and where God's called each of you, is that the research shows 95% of Americans do believe and agree on one thing, which is kind of shocking. The thing that we all agree on is that the people on the extreme ends, the poles of like most issues, the discussions, the political persuasions, they get all the airtime. And that those in the middle, which is a huge group, 70% consider themselves moderate and in middle-of-the-road kind of people who believe they can get along with people. They believe they can accommodate people who have different beliefs, right? But you know what they've said to us? They said there's 2 places we can't go for that kind of leadership. We don't believe in politics. We're going to find leadership that will help us find our way back together again as a country, as a society. And we also don't think religious leaders are going to be able to bring us back together. They had their chance, and we don't trust our pastors either. So guess who's left to lead? It's you. It's each of us. It's those who don't carry around those credentials but are operating in people's lives, who have places of influence, and that could be small or large. But people are hungry for leadership. And so at a moment in time where you might be feeling the need to shrink back, to sort of hide everything a little bit more because things are getting more and more contentious, you need to know what the data shows, that 70% of this population is saying, we wish somebody could lead us and model for us what civility looks like, what it looks like to disagree well, what it looks like to see somebody who I know, they have competing ideologies, spend time together. Think of like Bill Clinton and George Bush, the senior, right? And how post-presidencies, they started to work together, how that was just sort of a lift for everyone when you see that happening. That's the kind of modeling you have the opportunity to do. And I think that's the opportunity we're trying to describe in good faith, is this isn't bad religion, which the world has definitely given up on, but good faith says that our what we believe about the gospel is this is good news. We have something good to offer to every single person we're encountering. And it's not just to preach to them and tell them to get saved. No, we actually believe everything we believe leads to you flourishing more. And so I think we need to reestablish some confidence in that and we've lost a little bit of that. And I think you guys have an incredible opportunity to lead. Really.
Oh, yeah, amen. Guys, talk about the correlation of humility and the good faith.
I think one of the keys that well, let me tell this story, and I think that really helped to illustrate this. When we did the book on Christian, there's all these really difficult topics that we were taking on, and I remember writing an email to George Barna about all the topics, and evangelism, same-sex attraction, all sorts of different things. And I said, what do you think about us putting out this book? And he wrote back an email that said, you should put this book out. It's important for you to support what you have to say with data. But if you soften or reshape any of the things that we've concluded in this project just for the sake of our work, it would be better for us to be drummed out of business for you being honest than for us to try to just make this a soft serve ice cream cone. And it was very powerful to me at that time because remember, I had been working for him. I was just a vice president in the company. And when he says it would be better for us to be drummed out of business, this is his business, not mine. And so this idea of humility, of a sense of God's sovereignty, of a sense of vulnerability. A good friend of ours, Andy Crouch, has this new project on leadership, and for us to lead in this age. And this is my point about millennials. Even though I may make fun of them plateauing, and we find in our research that 1 in 4 millennials think they're going to be famous or well known by the time they're 25.
That's not true, huh?
Yeah, it could still work out for you, James. Yeah. This fact is that we have to be vulnerable with the people that we lead, even millennials. And so this idea of being humble, being willing to serve people. George was willing to give me a platform when I didn't deserve it. He was willing to give up his own platform. And here I was able to buy the business from him, in part because he showed the humility to let me go out and work on this project. And so this idea of if you're not putting leaders in a place where they could cost you something, you're not actually allowing for them to have real leadership in your work. If you're not actually putting yourselves in a position with your own kids, with people that are different from you, where it might cost you something, like that story of my brother-in-law is a story of me. I'd never put myself in a position with my brother-in-law where it might actually cost me something, right? Like I can tell you, friends, that I didn't even shed a tear when he passed. I felt terrible for my wife. I grieved for her, but I didn't grieve the loss of my brother-in-law because I was never humble enough to actually learn from him. And so I think this idea of humility, as Gabe's talking about, this need for true and clear leadership in our times, there is this sense in which so many of us, I think, just hang back and we keep these sort of things that we know how to control. And so this idea of actually being humble enough to enter into these relationships with our own kids. Just this last couple of years, this last year, I've been having a conversation with our kids like, guys, this business costs us a lot. I've gone a lot. Do you guys want, they're old enough. I have teen girls and an 11-year-old boy. Like, do you guys want us to sign up with this? I hope they say yes, and they have. But I had to be humble enough to them to say, like, guys, is this what you guys want to sign up with? Because you are having to make this choice with me. And it was so cute because just a couple of weeks ago, I was in one of those moments of tension about my job and how much I travel and all the rest. And they came up to me, and Jill, my wife, led them in just discussions like, guys, what do you want to do? Because Dad's going to go on this big book tour and blah, blah, blah. And they all commissioned me, laid hands on me to come on this thing. It was so cute. And they all sort of said, Dad, we want you to keep doing this. This is what God's asked you to do. So this idea of humility, had I not asked them, thanks, Ellen. I think this idea of humility and leadership is something we're so desperately lacking within our culture today, and it means that we've got to put ourselves in these places of vulnerability. Otherwise, we don't have the moral authority to lead.
It seems like we've gone for niceness. Niceness seems to be the key. If we're real nice, we'll never offend anyone, and that we're real nice, maybe they'll hear what we have to say. And it sort of becomes the neighbor on The Simpsons, right? Like always the guy that's over there and, ho diddly day, how are you? And it's like he's really nice, but no one wants to hang out with that guy. No one wants to have him work for them. No one wants to go to the barbecue at that guy's house, right? Niceness, though, is a very different topic than humility, because humility will always lead us into conversations. It'll always lead us into listening conversations, and it's so much more powerful than being nice.
Yeah.
And you guys had a lot to say on that.
Well, you're right. In our culture, I think we're kind of being trained to not have the difficult conversations. Like, we pretty much avoid them. Like, if something comes up with a colleague that we know could go toxic, maybe it's politics, right, or religion, the things we're not supposed to talk about. I mean, good luck with that this year, right? When those things start to come up, we sort of just avoid it. We don't get into those conversations anymore because we know we might offend somebody. One of the things we saw with pastors is that 80% of pastors are somewhat hesitant to speak to some of these difficult topics because they are concerned they're going to say it the wrong way. The people are going to not hear what they're trying to say, or they're going to use the wrong words, or they're not going to use gender confirmation. They're going to say it wrong, and everybody's going to go, "What? Aren't you with it?" And so they're not communicating about some of these difficult things. And yet when you talk to the people in their churches, and this is the great thing about research to see this, the people in their churches are saying at the same rate, we wish our pastors would talk more about this. We need equipping on this. We need to know how to respond. We don't know how to talk to our children. We don't know how to talk to our coworkers. Would you please talk about it? And so you have this huge miss happening, a huge miss on an area where we as the church are called to be disciples and to be discipled. So I think there's an opportunity for the church to step up in that. I think there's an opportunity for us to recognize niceness and politeness doesn't really get us anywhere. We need to be true to who we are. We need to lead with conviction. But let me tell you, you can't really lead with conviction or have courage unless it's grounded in something deeper than just your bravado. Okay? Like our conviction actually comes from a place. It comes from the Holy Spirit, which comes from us being in the Word of God. And if we're not in the Word of God, what happens is we can have misplaced kind of bravado, and we can talk about what we believe. But yeah, when you get into Scripture and you start to understand the story that's been playing out over thousands of years, it actually buoys your confidence to know we don't need to be alarmed right now about what's happening in our culture. God's not kind of wringing his hands going, oh, man, this American thing's kind of slipping away from me. I was really counting on it. And I think...
It's not going good down there. Yeah. I'm sure he's just wondering.
And instead, we can draw confidence from the stories of people like Daniel. I think of Esther. I think of Nehemiah, I think of Joseph, people who were just faithful in the midst of kingdoms and entire cultures that had no regard for what they believed, and yet God moved in amazing ways, often supernaturally, not through our own strategy. And so if we can start to trust God and live out our conviction and respond in the moment when something's in front of us, and trust Him to give us the words, I think it could be pretty amazing the kind of conversations we're going to have. And the way confidence and courage, as Eric Metaxas said once, before I was about to go to Stanford, which seemed like a suicide mission. I was invited to Stanford to talk to Gene Robinson, who was the first Episcopal bishop, gay bishop, to be, become a bishop within the Episcopal Church. Well, at his 10-year anniversary, I'm invited to sit on a stage at Stanford in front of all these students to disagree with his point of view on gay marriage, right? That's a suicide mission. So what I didn't realize, I'd been talking privately about this discussion with a lot of pastors and leaders and people I trusted, but I knew I hadn't publicly been willing to talk about it, and I knew I needed to have courage, and the Holy Spirit just convicted me and said, you got to go do this. Like, quit talking privately behind closed doors. Step out, have courage. I'll give you the words. And he did, and it was a pretty amazing experience.
And in the book, I think you guys use the word risk-avoidant conversations, right? I don't know how to get into this. I don't know that I want to get into this, so it's better to just stay away from it, right? Let's talk about that in this realm, but I think that also has a huge realm in just whether or not we have authentic relationships within our friends. So we got guys that are gathering Friday mornings, Thursday mornings, and risk-avoidant conversations are alive and well in chapters over donuts, bagels, and coffee. You know what I mean? So this is not a hot button issue. This is a fact that it's just easier to be this way. What can we learn in this that also really should be playing out in what we're doing in chapters?
Well, one of the things that has been a very long trend in the research we've done at Barna is that pastors are really great communicators, but they're not often great leaders in a particular sort of way. There's often really good leaders who are great communicators, and they end up rising to the ranks of prominence. But most pastors aren't actually, part of the reason we're struggling, I think, as a culture is that pastors aren't very good at confronting these, they're actually more risk avoidant often. And so I'd like to challenge this group to think about some of the ways in which the practices that you guys are learning within the business world and within your sort of sectors of influence, maybe part of what God's asking us to do in this moment where there's a very conflicted cultural moment of what do we stand for and how do we live all this out, that you've been practicing some of these difficult conversations for years and decades in the business world. You've had to challenge people to be their very best version of themselves. You've had to have those difficult conversations to hire and fire and do, all the things that happen. And, Gabe's telling this story about visiting with Gene Robinson and what maybe you've never noticed this before, but you've been practicing, Gabe, all these sort of conversations in back rooms about how to talk about sex and sexuality. And so it was, as hard as it was a very natural one. And so we are in such desperate need for leadership in this culture, within the church, within the Christian community, within our families, within our businesses. And I'm going to ask you to think about how do you challenge yourself to take some of the things you're already doing pretty well, of having good, healthy conversations, especially within a business context, within an entrepreneurial context, but then try to practice those in some other ways. Practice those within the context of your family. Learn how to, coach people along in what God's asking them to do. We are so desperate for that kind of leadership today, and I think you guys can rise to that kind of occasion.
I'd just say I've been meeting with a counselor the last year, trying to work on my junk and my issues, and one of the things he said to me that we often confuse transparency and vulnerability. And as it relates to men and sharing with one another, transparency is when we're in control of what we're sharing because we know we can share this, and we're maybe even sometimes doing it so we can appear to be vulnerable, but we're very much in control. We know what the reaction's going to be. True vulnerability is when you expose something about yourself and you've put yourself at total risk because you don't know what the reaction's going to be, whether it's from your spouse, whether it's from your best friend, somebody you've been doing life with for years. And when you do that, that's when you're truly being vulnerable. It's truly when you've opened yourself up to actually experience the love of God that many of us don't understand from a Father that loves us. It's something I'm trying to learn. I haven't figured it totally out, honestly. But I'm trying to learn that, and I can just say, for me, my relationships with men and being able to do that has impacted me greatly over the last year to try to push into that next level of relationship and friendship, which is ultimately what we all need. It's what we're all longing for, and we're never going to be able to live this out publicly or in these bigger spaces if we're privately not willing to offer that sense of vulnerability to one another.
So guys, what I read is that you're real solid on principle. And you're also big on how we see the best in other people. Is that an accurate portrayal of the book?
Yeah, absolutely. It's
Yeah.
a posture shift that I think we hope that the church is going through right now to move away from only caring so much about what we believe and getting all that right, but missing it completely on what it means to love others.
And the problem is that a lot of this next generation is so seen as so overreact on belief that we don't know how to love and put ourselves in those vulnerable positions. So they say that belief doesn't matter in my world. So they're over-indexing on the love and let's let our friends, drive our decisions. So there has to be some balance between conviction and love. And like we think this is a challenge that the church can rise to. It's not either or. It has to be love and belief and living that out.
So the book just came out on the 2nd, right? So this is right on the front of your book tour, but I'm assuming you both have spent some time on airplanes. And when you say, I just finished writing a book and I'm headed out to do my book tour, and they say, what's the title? And you tell them it's Being a Christian When Society Thinks You're Irrelevant and Extreme. I'm interested in some of the reactions that you've had. What are people telling you in 2A when you're sitting there saying?
Yeah, they're saying, you're one of them? Really? No, it actually provokes all kinds of great conversations for us because they can't quite figure it out. Because you're willing to acknowledge all the bad things that religion and Christianity actually have represented in our culture. But I think the fact that we're just trying to work on it, that's the thing. We don't just sit around and write books. He's leading an organization trying to help equip churches to really think well about the next generation. Q and what we're trying to do there is create communities. Thursday night we had 75 cities around the world host an evening called Q Commons. For 2 hours, it was all about Christians loving their city and talks happening locally, and it was just a beautiful thing. So we're trying to work on this. We're not just trying to talk about it.
Yeah. So last question, tell me the definition of relevant that we should be holding on to.
I just want to give you my most awkward plane conversation was when I sat in the middle seat, and she asked me what I did. I said, I write Christian books, and I write books, and then she's like, what kind? About faith. And I said, well, what do you do? I felt like it was a socially polite thing to respond. And she says, well, I get naked for a living. And there's like no good question to come back to that one.
You were stumped.
I know,
Yeah.
exactly.
You're looking through spreadsheets like crazy, and there's nothing to find in there. Trust me. There are no spreadsheets that will give you that answer. It's best to just put your earphones on and go back to your spreadsheet.
That's my strategy right there.
Guys, thank you for being here with us. And I'm thankful you guys took some time to talk to us about a touchy subject and something that we need to be prepared as business owners and guys in our community, leaders. Gabe, it's a good challenge for us. So anyway, guys, the book is Good Faith, Being a Christian in Society, When Society Thinks You're Irrelevant and Extreme. The guys have sent some down. They are available in our resource center, which is out back through in the ambassador room by our resource center. And they're going to stay after tonight and sign some. They're going to stay and be with Pat and Keith. And then afterwards, they'll be around. And if we need to, we'll move the signing out to the cigar deck. But anyway, thank these guys, Dave Kinnaman.
Thank you.
And Gabe Lyons.
Thank you.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you.